May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So it's Mother's Day. And like I said, as we gathered, that this may be a complicated day, one that is full of celebration for many of us who had beautiful and wonderful mothers who nurtured us. Others, we may have had a difficult time with our mother for a variety of reasons. Some of us may have desired to be parents and weren't able to. Some of us may have lost children. There are varieties of ways of entering into the story of Mother's Day. Many of you know that my very first year working here, I lost my mother right around Easter time, right during Holy Week. And so this day is a complicated one, and one that I have chosen to tell a story about, because I think it helps me enter into this scripture in a different way. So let me tell you a little bit about my mom. She was that church lady, the one who volunteered for everything. She was the director of the youth. She taught Sunday school. She was the director of the Vacation Bible School. She was on church council for pretty much, I don't know if my church growing up had term limits, because I think if she had term limits, she would have term limited it out. But she was always on church council. She was, in another context, a youth and family pastor, but I grew up in a place that didn't ordain women, and so her labor of love for faith formation for children was something that was taken for granted. And now that I am out of that system, I know she was so much more than that system gave her credit for. And so I had the joy and the burden of hosting her in my home in the days before she died. She lived with me for 17 days before she died. And they were some of the hardest and most beautiful time in my life. And while I don't remember her very last words, you know, we put a lot of stock in last words, I know one of the last conversations I had with her, and it was about pastoring. Now, this was the woman who came from a tradition that if you didn't learn Greek and Hebrew, you weren't a real pastor. And she said that to me. You know, I'm not a linguist, I'm a pastoral care expert. And so she was like, well, then you're not a real pastor. That was early in my seminary, because I wasn't planning on taking Greek or Hebrew. So we had some, we'll say, complicated feelings about my role as a pastor. But in those last days, as many last days take this shape, those complicated feelings started to melt away, and I saw her for the minister that she truly was. And she said to me something that I didn't love at the time, and that was, "You are doing what I couldn't do. You are the pastor that I couldn't be." And at the time, you know, it was very developmentally appropriate. I was like 27, and I was like, no, I'm doing my own thing, right? And now a few years have gone by, about 4 years, and I have softened and I have learned, and I see her story through a different lens now. And I think of that verse, "You will go on to do greater things than even I would." That verse hits differently now. When I think about the generations, my grandmother, the mystic who always wanted to bless everyone, my mother, the church worker who poured out her life and her time into my faith formation and the faith formation of my fellows, and now me, the one who has Rev in front of her name, who can stand up here and be a pastor. I couldn't have done it without all of those generations. And, you know, in my youthful, what word do I want? narcissism. I didn't see it. And that was fine. I needed to self-differentiate to find my own way, and now I can circle back and say, yes, I am in the lineage of these women, and I am standing here in front of all of you because they were. It's a powerful place to be on this complicated day. And so I think about this idea that, you know me, I'm a bylaw nerd, so I bring up the Constitution and bylaws of the United Church of Christ like more often in sermons than is probably like normal, but it links, I promise, right? So we have this, basically the one thing that you have to be able to say to become a United Church of Christ church is that Jesus is the head of the church. Now, what that means to us and what that means to some of our sibling churches may be very different. There are lots of ways to enter that conversation, but in our bylaws it also says Jesus is the head of the church. And then I think about this story and this verse where Jesus actually pretty clearly positions himself as an ancestor. He says, I'm going away. I'm leaving this in your hands. Do with it what you will. I have faith that it will be even better than what I was able to pull off at this time. So I think about, what does that mean about headship, right? Because isn't that topsy-turvy? Jesus is saying, okay, training wheels off. This is on you, you guys, right? And what does that mean about mothers? I took some liberties with the text this morning. We don't spend a lot of time with the divine feminine, and I've been kind of poignantly thinking about my mother's house and what it's like to come home and what that peculiar grief was when that house was sold and I couldn't go home anymore. Right? That itch that will never be scratched. I will never be able to step back into my mother's house. And so when we think about that big cosmic homegoing, what if it was my mother's house? Because isn't that something that gets somewhere deep in your soul? It's different. It feels different. It nurtures differently than my father's house. And so we have that itch that won't be scratched until some hereafter. And then we get this charge to become. What do we do with that? Because we're used to looking at Jesus as a head, right? He's always better than we are. He's always somewhere in the distance. He's always an ideal to strive for. But in this text, Jesus is leading from behind, saying, I believe in all of you. This text comes from the farewell discourses. The lectionary does some fancy footwork. It was technically, this was kind of Jesus' last really long sermon right before he was arrested in Holy Week. But the way that the lectionary handles things, they say, well, maybe this is a better text to do with this time between Easter and Ascension, when Jesus really leaves for real, is the idea. So we get this idea of, well, what do we do now? I can imagine what the disciples are going through. Probably similar to what I went through when I lost my mom. What do I do now? Here was this anchor that I didn't even know was grounding me, and now suddenly it lets go. How am I supposed to make sense of my world? How has this person who is supposed to be my elder and my head, they're not there anymore, and now I have to make something of what it is they gave me and all of this other stuff that they never even had to deal with? It's a big question mark. And I think there's something there about vocation. We're supposed to go on and do greater things. And Jesus says, I don't have all the answers. I don't even know what that will look like. I don't know what a cell phone is. What's a COVID, right? Like, Jesus had no idea. But he believed in us enough to say, you will go on and do greater things than I will. And so we have more questions than answers, dear church. Isn't that always the way? And so my question for you is framed by Friedrich Buechner, who I like a lot. There's this quotation he has about vocation that says, vocation is where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need. So that's a two-part question. Where is our gladness? And where is the need? And where do those two things, three-part question, I lied. Where do those two things touch? So it's been a little while since we've had a conversation in this sermon time. So we'll start with that first one. As a church, where do you see our deep gladness? Aaron.
Serving communities that are often forgotten.
Serving communities that are often forgotten, absolutely. Our deep gladness isn't actually here, it's out there. Yeah. Judy.
I think one of the glad things about this church is commitment to serving others. We practice what we preach, and that box downstairs is an indication.
Yeah.
That's the One Nation Walking Together box. And it's just one of several missions that this church serves.
Yeah, absolutely. I set up the box this morning, and then I put all the things that just came in last week, and I was like, oh no, we're gonna need a bigger box.
Well, I certainly am hearing an awful lot of gladness in your beautiful singing this morning.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Cheyenne, then Linda, and then Deborah.
Providing a community that for those who don't think they have one.
That's our hope, right? Thank you. Linda, I'm gonna need an arm extension. Dave, if you'll, thank you.
Similar, the community and the love we have for each other, which gives us the strength and to spread love beyond here.
Yeah, it's regenerative, right? We are strengthened here to go out beyond these walls and serve and make relationships and then come back and be strengthened and offer something beautiful here. Jackie snagged it. I'm coming, Deborah.
Hospitality.
Hospitality.
Hopefully we welcome everyone with open arms, and if they want them, hugs and whatever they need.
Yes, absolutely. Like literally embracing. All right, Deborah.
I think the theme has been very well lifted up, but community in all aspects of it. Learning to be community with one another, offering that to those that want to check us out, and then being community to the community, the wider community.
Yeah.
So that's our theme.
Yeah, absolutely. Community. So then there's been this kind of talk, a theme that I'm hearing is this inside and outside, right? This back and forth, what happens here and what happens out there. And so we talk an awful lot about a world that's hurting. It can be kind of crushing sometimes. But I want us to name what's hurting right now. Where do you see deep need outside these walls? Cindy.
Because that's where I live every day. It's our
youth. They're so depressed. They're so anxious. And when I go to teach every day, it is, you're good enough. You can do this. And for many of them, it's the only one voice, when in our school that tells them that. And it doesn't matter if you are different, you're still valuable.
Yeah, thank you. Right, we mean it when we say, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, right? Like, we mean it when we say that no one is beyond redemption, that no one is beyond the reach of God's love, of being lovable. Cheyenne, and then Dana.
Poverty. For as rich as our country is, we still have so many people that are fighting just to eat, fighting just to have a roof over their head, and each day more and more people are seen on the street begging for money.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a statistic that says for every $100 rent goes up, homelessness increases by 7%. That is unconscionable, because the apartment I rented 5 years ago for $650 is now twice that, or if not more. And so you're right, the need, the deep pain, the basic necessities are just not there. Well, they are there, but capitalism.
Well, that was kind of what I was going to say also is Colorado Springs has a huge homeless population, and it's really sad that we can't do a better job of finding a solution. And that's not just to wipe them out of the city, but to meet their needs. And for starters, I think we're doing the best we can at the time, this church is, with spreading smiles and sandwiches, but we need help from other folks to alleviate the situation.
For sure. Thank you. Amanda.
I'm thinking of communities and groups of people here and across the country who are being violently targeted by politicians and cultural leaders, and I'm especially thinking of members of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, trans people, lesbian, gay, bisexual people, undocumented immigrants, and the mentally ill.
Absolutely. There is a push to eradicate what makes us uncomfortable, because there isn't that understanding that everyone is valuable. Cayenne.
We really need to take notice and this is in relationship of a lot of what's been said, but when we look at one of the big elements of everything that's going on is mental health. And I know Amanda just said that, but even with what Cindy said in relationship to our young people being depressed and anxious and gun violence and so many things, the big underlying issue is mental health. And it's all around us and it's everywhere, but it seems to be disguised, but it's there in everything.
Thank you. So to tie it all together, what is our gospel? Oh, is there anyone on Zoom who'd like to chime in? Okay. Oh, Deborah. Yeah.
Many of you know that I was over with my family in the Netherlands for a couple weeks, and I wanted to share this with you, but I thought I'd have more time to think it through. The Ukraine refugees. The Netherlands has embraced them. There are centers all over. Noonan is a very small village, and there are 4 centers in Noonan. People are hiring them to clean houses, to be teachers' aides, they're absorbing them into themselves. And I was sharing with my nephew because he said, all we hear about is how much Americans hate refugees and immigrants. The juxtaposition of that, the vitriol that it was very telling. And I don't know how to change that, but man, we could learn a lot from other countries on how to treat people fleeing violence and death who have a lot to offer us.
Thank you. Yeah. So, our greater thing, the language that we have to talk about it is maybe different. I don't know that Jesus would have used the words depression or anxiety or mental health, but he reached out to people who were untouchable. That was his kind of main thing, right? Bringing them in, telling them that they are beloved, telling them that they are worthy of community and God's presence. He may not have used the word refugee, but there are refugee stories all throughout the Bible. And so my question for us, our greater thing, our gladness, our deep gladness, and the world's deep need, to me, that's not only our vocation, but it is our lived out gospel. Judy, like you said, we practice what we preach. You know, our money and our resources are where our mouth is at, right? So what is our gospel for this moment? What is our call to action, call to greatness for this moment? Cayenne, and then Cindy.
To make ourselves ready.
To make ourselves ready. Can you say more about that? That's loaded. I could go like 18 different ways, and I don't want to.
Well, if we take into consideration all the things we just shared about what's going on in the world, and if we look at our own city, we are sharing those things because we're seeing them more and more. They are prevalent. We cannot not see them anymore. And one of the things we get to notice is that the folks that we have mentioned and described want the same things we want. And so, for example, when we look at homelessness in this city, and there's always a time where people want to ignore it or not see it, and it's not in their backyard and in their neighborhood. But in that vein, homeless people don't want to be crowded. They don't want to be subjected to having to always be exposed to substance abuse. And they are moving away from that and into places in this city where they don't think that exists, which is right here where we are. And that's not the only issue that is showing up more and more right here where our church exists. So we need to make ourselves ready.
Thank you. Cindy.
That was so insightful. I have to recover what I was thinking. What I find here is that we are the size where we need each other. And it isn't that a place you can just come in and be anonymous and walk out. Because you are needed here. What we're trying to do is big. And we do the best that we can, and we support one another. And different people have different groups or things that they want to support, and we need to help them to do what they need to do, and in turn, they support and help the rest of us who have ideas. And in that, I believe, is where we make church.
Absolutely. For a long time, above our mission giving down in the front entryway, what did it say? Who remembers? Deborah, don't cheat. You wrote it. Church is not a spectator sport, right? It's all hands on deck, guys. Things are dire, and they're getting more dire. And so this is our call to hope, our call to action, our call to love. This is the greater thing. And I am floored every time there is a call for some type of giving, for hygiene items or for peanut butter and jelly, for sandwiches. You all rise up to meet it with grace and generosity. And so I have faith that we are doing that greater thing. And also there's a tension there, right? Like Kyan said, there is more for us to do. And it's time for us to make ourselves ready. We are a church on the brink. Not of anything bad, but actually of the greatness Jesus is talking about. Because we have the trust of the community. We have showed up and shown out and said whose side we're on for a long time. And now we are being called to live into that even deeper. And I could not be more proud of all of you and the ways that you do that, and the ways that we support each other, and the ways that we will continue to support each other to make each other ready for what our future holds. There is no better legacy. I think we make Jesus proud. Amen.